enjoyed it, so that's always pleasing. It's not a perfect film, and I don't claim that it is, but there's so many ways we can talk about it. I don't want to talk about it from a documentary standpoint, although one could teach with this film all that goes on, but you're not students, you're just moviegoers who love films and maybe want to enjoy it. So I'd rather start with your questions and deal with them first. You all know who made it. I was very involved in the film. I wasn't just a button presser. In fact, a little history, Greg Barson, who produced and directed it, had been a lifelong fan of Jerry Lewis since he was a boy. And he and his brother used to watch all the Lewis movies and television shows and pretend they were him. So Greg grew up and became a filmmaker, I guess. And his first film was a documentary on Phyllis Diller, which actually is much more intimate than this. And you feel like you really get to know her better. I do encourage you to see it. She's a painter, she's intelligent, she's literate. You know, the silly persona that she developed was only for the camera. You know, and she's really an intellectual, but not snobbish about it.
What's it called? Just Phyllis Diller? Is that how we find her?
Just look up Phyllis Diller documentary.
Oh.
We're seeing, because it will surprise you with what you didn't know about her. She's so different from her persona. She's actually somebody you could talk to and would want to talk to. And Greg, I don't know how he met her, but she befriended him at a time when she was no longer working. She was probably 80. And she took him into her life and toured her home and talked very candidly about her painting and her husband and her life. And we can get into it later, but on the strength of that film, I agreed to work with Greg. And that says a lot, because this was not going to be an easy slog. So let's deal with your questions first. Frank Reiner has his first hand in the air.
Yeah, I want to know first why you felt this was a movie that we should discuss. Not that not that it was interesting or whatever. And you said not from a documentary standpoint, so we're not looking at it from historical perspective or whatever. But why did you think it would be significant for discussion?
Because I thought he would resonate with all of you, having grown up with him as well. And that you see something of your own youth in him.
I thought that usually we were looking for ethical kinds of,
Oh, you take me so literally. Come on, we got to have some fun. You take me so literally.
Yeah, I do. I respect you, and I listen to you very closely.
I know you. Thank you. I appreciate that. But there is much to this film that you don't know. And in a way, we can discuss the nature of documentary film, because it only paints the kind of picture the filmmakers let you see. There is a lot of other stuff that you don't see. And there is a gorilla in the room. We'll talk about that later. It's the gorilla that doesn't get mentioned, which, if you go along with the cliche, they never get talked about. So it's fun. I've heard other people say, gee, can't we have some fun sometimes? So this was my to put some work that I thought had some teeth to it, and that might surprise you and maybe delight you occasionally. So I hope it's okay. Doris?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else knew this, but I did not know his father was a comedian or an actor. I was shocked to find that out. So it's been in his family forever then.
Right. He grew up as a vaudeville kid. I didn't know that either.
I didn't know that.
You just think that he was born out of an egg or something, or, and appeared on the scene. No, he was a vaudeville brat.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And a depression kid too. And that's a huge part of his personality.
He was a what kid?
Depression.
Depression. Yeah.
Very much so. He was, and part of this was his father, and the hardscrabble life they had in vaudeville and on the Borscht Belt, was you got to earn a living before you can live, and you got to watch out for yourself because nobody else will. And there's a very positive side of that. It can be American exceptionalism, as some right-wingers would have us believe, but it's also, there's a dangerous side to that as well. And that is, it makes you selfish and self-centered. and not feel like you have any obligation to your fellow people or citizens or the people you work with. And that was a big part of his career. So, there, you know, Frank, there's lots of hidden stuff in this I can talk about. It's largely my point of view. It's not in the film because I was just a hired hand on this, even though I had a big hand in making it, because Greg didn't know how to tackle this subject. He just knew he loved Jerry and had been filming before I met Jerry. Greg had been filming for 2 years, and he filmed Jerry several times, interviewed him a couple times in different situations on his boat in San Diego Harbor and elsewhere, and followed him around. I don't want to name the gorilla in the room yet, but he covered him there as well. Joel, what's up? What's on your mind, Joel?
Yes, I was wondering why, while they went through how he got into show business with his father and such, but as an adult, nothing about his personal life in this.
You're so perceptive. Did you know? Did you read the credits at the end?
Maybe I missed it.
Do you know who the executive producer was?
He was one of his sons, I think, wasn't it?
No, he was.
He was.
Oh.
And this is a problem with documentary. It's just like a studio film. Whoever holds the most power calls the shots. And Greg, as sweetheart of a guy as he was, and as sincere as he was, let Jerry's power over him, both as a fan and as a rights holder of all the material we wanted to use, control him. And even after we got control of the material in a legally binding contract, Greg still refused to do what was right for the film as a more comprehensive and personal documentary, which you're hinting at, Joel.
Yeah. Yeah.
By then it was too late because we were very deep. We started editing this at the either 2010 or 2011. We edited for about 9 months and were accepted into the Cannes Film Festival for the 2012 screening. It did very well there. We can come to that later. But it was clearly a case where the producer didn't have the courage to stand up for the film instead of the power that the supposed authority figure had over him when he no longer had any. You know, we didn't get the rights to Jerry's footage and his personal archive and his personal photographs until very late in the game, until probably late 2011, when it was basically locked up. You know,
Jim, isn't it, you know, you watched the story about Jerry and the way he was, it was clear that he was a control freak about everything that he did.
Yeah.
So it was not at all unexpected. I mean, I expected at the end to see that he was the executive producer, because obviously there was nothing bad about him, nothing about his kids, nothing about his wife or wives, I guess, that he had, and nothing about all the bad things he did. So clearly the film was made by him, paid for by him, and he was a control freak just by the nature of the film and what it showed in the film. So it wasn't a surprise to me, but it was what it was. I just want to add, if I can, Jim, it was a spectacular film, I thought, the way it was made. If I was watching carefully the way the film was put together, the clips, the edits, the way the soundtrack went one way, and then you had different film clips that related to it that were put in front of the sound. So the sound kept going in the background of him saying something, and you interspersed clips. There wasn't a single instance where I got bored or distracted during the show, and documentaries generally are boring or boring somewhere. I don't know. It's a little bit like Jerry. If you watch the film, Jerry was very clear about things having to have a beat, a rhythm, and a beat.
Yeah.
And the rhythm had to go on, and that rhythm was put into this documentary, I assume, by you. I assume that Jerry was watching over your shoulder, but I don't know. But it seemed like Jerry made the film because it had the same rhythm, beat. There wasn't a second where I got distracted or bored. And that's spectacular, I thought, for a documentary. So my hat's off to you, Jim.
Well, not hats off to me because I listened to him or because he had any control over me. He had control over my producer director. But the point is that Jerry obeyed the same rules of entertainment that I do. Don't let the audience get bored. Don't let them sit still, but also don't ever let them get confused. They should always know what they're looking at. And, he was a filmmaker. He knew how to hold attention. And this is woven into the DNA of all movies, even the bad ones. They try. But as to your comment about the witnesses, the subjects, whoops, did I just lose you people? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I just lost Zoom. There you are. I decided early on that most documentaries will hold on a talking head until a speech or a paragraph is delivered. I did not, because I felt we know who, Eddie Murphy is, and Billy Crystal and Jerry Crystal and Billy Crystal and Jerry Seinfeld and Spielberg and Burnett, and it's like, it's okay, they're there. We're not there to see them. We're here to hear what they can illuminate about Jerry. So I tried to create a talkback where the clips and the documentary footage were responding to what people were saying. Not exactly, but perhaps giving you a sense of what it was really like and proving that what they were saying was true. As I give you an example, when Eddie Murphy is saying he planned all this out, and you see Jerry sliding off that Rococo chair 6 different ways, and each looks like it's spontaneous. And of course, he rehearsed that quite a bit. So again, it's more important to see Jerry doing that than to hear Eddie Murphy talk about it. And this is something that Ken Burns doesn't appreciate because he makes different kinds of films. And it was a kind of, not just rhythm, but a language I tried to set up where the people could comment on the clips and the clips could comment on what the people were saying. So neither one seemed like an excuse for the other. They had to exist together. Looking at it this afternoon, I said, I cut away from the people talking a little too quickly. But frankly, that's how they spoke.
Okay.
I probably cut away from them so quickly because they went on to something else or they stuttered or something. So the material often dictated when I would cut away or cut to, but the content was what drove all those decisions about what are we looking at? Why are we looking at it? What is it proving? What do we learn about him and his work and the world at the same time? The world kind of escaped us. We can talk about that later. But it is a very unusual documentary in that the subjects don't wag the dog. They don't have a lot of screen time. Their voices do. But on camera, we're looking at the subject and his work, and it's all about that. Does that help, Steve?
Yeah, it does. And obviously you're going to talk about the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, I can talk about it, but it's not there. That's one of the baby elephants in the room. Let's go on till we discover what the big elephant is. Susie.
I want to commend you, Jim, because up until now, we have not seen anything that you have edited. And my goodness, I'd like for there to be a whole stream of your films that you've edited, because it was really terrific.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm glad you like it, because that's really what I was trying to thrill people with his work.
What I would like to say is I'm a huge fan of Jerry Lewis, and he can appear very fragmented all over the place. And when he's doing his comedy or when he's doing an interview or whatever, or I especially watched the telethons. I never missed one of those MS telethons, but you pulled it all together. And I want to know, because I'm just so interested, if you could at some point tonight, give us a little bit of your technique, what you do. I mean, I've just seen editors with tons of film on the floor, going through the film and it's on the floor and cutting this and cutting that. I mean, is that really how it goes?
I happen to have when I'm burying my head into a project, I have an encyclopedic memory of all the footage.
Hmm.
And this actually wasn't that many hours of material, but it was very diverse hours. So I watched 13 films, the films he had the rights to. You notice that there's a montage of posters of all the films he made.
Yeah.
Those were the films we didn't have the rights to, so we couldn't use the clips.
Hmm.
Oh.
So you'll notice that when he left Paramount, he took the rights. After 30 years, he had the rights to all the films he made there. So I kept all those in memory, and I looked over every, I'll tell you this, he had a photographer, a cinematographer, who traveled with him when they went on their promotional tours for the movies, he and Dean. And that's what all that black and white footage is, and of him performing, and the crowds around the bus, the color footage of the girls at the ticket kiosk, and the color footage of the fans around the buses. His own personal photographer, cinematographer, whom he paid to shoot that and traveled with him, shot it on black and white 16mm film. Nobody had seen that before. We had it, right? It's one of those things we were holding out for to get the clearance, the legal right to show that in this film. So that's part of the I'll get to the process later, but it's a matter of having not just an encyclopedic memory, but an associative memory. Oh, this line reminds me of the shot I saw back there in the other movie. Or he's talking about growing up, so let's show him being a kid. Sometimes it would counter to what the subject was. It was a contrast, not just a supporting thing. It was amusing in itself because he's all about contrast and conflict and surprising our expectations of him and the material. So it was like, in a way, it was easy. It was easy for me because this is the crazy stuff I do. I started out doing trailers for movies where you have to like draw in just different parts of the movie and even use them in ways they were not meant to be used so that you could create a picture that was important, or you created a picture of the film that people thought they wanted to see, even though it wasn't what the film they wanted to see. So this sleight of hand is what filmmakers do all the time. And I happen to have had an upbringing in that sleight of hand, which helped me out in this. It helped me out in reality shows, but I served the devil in those, and not something as worthy as this subject, even though he wasn't worthy of it, but his work was. So it's the associative memory of what relates to what, and coming up with new connections between seemingly unlike material that makes a piece like this come together. And it was exhausting. There were days where I didn't know what I was doing. We just assembled sequences and didn't know. I'll tell you a story of one sequence that hit the floor. And it shows, it showed him as a filmmaker. Carl Reiner tells this story that Jerry Lewis invited him and his wife and another couple over to dinner one night. And the day before, he had shot some material. I forget what he shot, but he put together a little vignette for them, and he showed it to them after dinner, and he'd made it all that day. And so Carl narrates this story of how knocked out they were. Oh, I know what he did. So Jerry had photographed himself talking to each person, each of his dinner guests, pointing them out, and Carl, you did this, and your wife, you did that. And it's like, how could he do all this? And he did it on his own, just on sheer energy. Well, I took that sequence, and the scene where he's a mustachioed pilot in a biplane, and
Yes,
he's
yes,
and
it's
then
hysterical.
it's chasing him, adorable. Well, there's a lot more to that film, where there's a movie screen in the wall of the cabin in front of this people on the plane, and he comes out, and I put him on the screen on that plane doing other things. And I basically conflated Jerry running around doing things with Carl's telling about how he must have run around and done things for us while we were watching this, while using the footage from the airplane. So it's like I don't know how these things come to me, or, I know that they click, that there's something, sometimes it's a word or a phrase or an action. Sometimes it's content, as any of you do when you're writing or thinking of, oh, I remember the time my daughter did this, and it reminded me of the time my son did that. It's like these things just come to you because they rise to the surface of your brain. And it's when you sink your head into a documentary, you and the director, as it is with a feature film, you and the director are the only ones who know where everything is. You're the only ones who have an intimate knowledge of what this footage can tell people. Right? Producers don't know it. They don't have the time because you're the one who's, working there for 10 months. They're working on their next project, or they're, whoever they're with, they're being important. And we're doing the real work of putting it together in a way that the audience needs and wants to see. Is that helpful, Susie?
Was Jerry pleased with the whole thing? He's
Let's
not
talk
big-
about that later. Yes,
Oh.
he was pleased enough.
Okay,
His,
we'll talk about
his wife at the time when we finished it in 2012 thanked us very much for it because it did honor to his memory. He was still alive. I mean, he just died like last year or 2 years ago. But it really did, it honored his career and his accomplishments.
it. Did. Most
Didn't honor
definitely.
any of his cruelty to her or her daughter or the other people, but that's not there. But people got it. We had a premiere screening was on the Paramount lot, and a lot of people came to see it, and they all loved it. They got it. Even my kids liked it. My daughter turned to me and she said, that was pretty good. I'll take it. I'll take it. It's like, I know it's buried there. But in terms of how do these things get connected? How does anybody put two ideas together? And I know the lawyers among us, Arlene and Arthur, and Ida, I don't know your profession, Steve Zimmerman, it's like there's a connection you feel, and it's not just an intellectual, it's a visceral connection. The synapses trigger in your head and say, there's a similarity here. What is that? And then I, as a film editor, have to say, well, how can I use that similarity? How can I integrate it so it has more meaning than just something, a scattered connection that's linked only by one word? Okay, Susie, we can come back to that process. I think Doris has a
I hope
question,
so.
and then
I
Anne.
think
Oh,
I just have to say, Jim, that, and I kind of want to thank Susie for suggesting that I watch it, but also want to go back to something that Frank was talking about earlier. I came from a serious dislike of Jerry Lewis,
most women do.
but not just as a woman, but as a human being who really felt that he was doing a disservice to too many different things in the community, to interpersonally to other people. And I unlike you, Susie, always felt very manipulated by his work within the MD community. However, I have to say, Jim, that if part of the success of a film is that you shift someone's perspective, for me, this film did that, not because it took away from all the things that I disliked so intensely about him, but because I hadn't an appreciation for his skill scope. I really didn't recognize the fact that he was a director, a writer, a producer, an editor, and I never knew about his invention of the video feedback.
Mm-hmm.
That
Playback, yeah.
notion that, yeah. I mean, I sort of found myself going, my God, I had no idea that this man was this multi-talented. I didn't recognize that he produced things with such speed. That just blew me away, how quickly things got written. And I found myself wondering, in answer to your question about what questions do we have, I found myself wondering how much was really written on the stage during the movie, as opposed to just being his spontaneous self sometimes. And I wondered about the proportionality of that.
Well, I don't think anybody will know that unless you were there on the set all the time. I'm sure he improvised. I know he personally improvised when the camera was on him, but he had a very tight sense of what was needed from all the other players. And he probably didn't allow that much improvisation from them unless he was in the scene and wanted them to react to him. He was a control freak, it's true, but he was a control freak so he could act out among the solid pieces. You know, he knew what it took for the building to stand up without falling down, but he provided the amusement between the pillars that held it up. This brings up something that's very much in vogue today, and that is, can we separate the artist from the art? Is Wagner's Ring really great musical art, or was Wagner just this mean anti-Semite? Alec Baldwin, well, did he shoot somebody, or was he a decent comic actor? Woody Allen, is he a child abuser and a philanderer, or is he a great comic? Well, people are complex, and that's the answer I think that this has to bring us to, is that we are all variations of the same multiple themes of human nature. And we're all capable of doing bad, and we're all capable of doing good, and some people do both. And the work that artists create, this is something that just came to me because it's so much in the news and prevalent. It's all over any art criticism now. If you look at a piece of art, whether it's cinema or sculpture or film or music, and it moves you, do you think that that really was not coming from the soul of the person who made it? Do you think it was dispassionate? No, it came because they were connecting with the same human feelings you can. So as disgusted as you may be to say, oh, I feel the same feelings as an anti-Semite. Well, you don't feel the anti-Semitic feelings, but you feel the torment, the pain, the grief, betrayal, of disappointment in love. These people know the human heart. Theirs may be a little more evil than yours, but there's what we have to acknowledge is that they share us and we share a part of them.
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful perspective. That was a good one.
And I'm so glad this wasn't a re-education program for you, because he was an awful human being. You're not wrong. But Susie's also right to say this guy was a marvelous entertainer for a while. It's complex, and this is the kind of discussion we should be having. Doris? You're muted, Doris. Please unmute.
I didn't realize that. Apologize. Was there a reason his personal life was omitted? There were a couple of scenes where his two sons were thrown in there out of the blue, all of a sudden, his son. And then at one point, I think somewhere along the film, he mentioned my daughter. Period. That was the end of it. We don't know anything about him. So from what I knew about Jerry Lewis, I remembered he had one wife with 5 boys.
Yes.
Then he got divorced and he married this other woman and had one daughter. So
Correct.
I don't know if that's still what his life was like, or just reading about it and, trying to keep us in touch. I don't know what was going on, but was anything purposely left out from the film? Was it not necessary?
Well, we didn't feel it was necessary to include the wife or the daughter, but up front, he did tell Greg, keep them off camera. I don't want them involved.
Ooh.
The sons were okay because he owed them something. They were part of his entourage and his career. They worked for him. They didn't have any other jobs. The guy who had the headset and the turtleneck and the jacket, he was like the technical director of the shows that Jerry did on the road. You saw his performance in a tuxedo before the audience. That was 2 shows at a casino in Missouri. So it gives you an idea of, who goes to a casino show in Missouri. This is not the Beatles in Las Vegas. This is Jerry Lewis in Abilene or something. So he gave him a job, and Chris, the guy who was heavyset and round-faced, he knew his dad. They all knew their dad's talent. They knew how to talk about it safely. But Chris was the protector of the archive. He controlled the archives. And Chris was a reasonable guy. He knew his dad was a mean man. But he knew that he had to protect the legacy. And we played ball with him. Greg actually went to Chris and talked about, how should I approach Jerry with this scene? How will he react to it? What do you think? And so Chris was helpful to Greg, but didn't give Greg any courage. But gave Greg enough assurance that Jerry wouldn't boot him out. Jerry was living in Las Vegas at the time, and often he was on his boat in San Diego Harbor. So Greg would visit him at both places. The shot in his office is in his home in Las Vegas. He kept his wife busy by buying her horses and giving her a ranch to work them on. And the daughter was off to school. I think she went to San Diego State or something. But he didn't want that part of his personal life covered. And frankly, we could tell the story without that. That was not a problem. We could also tell the story of the first family and not have it be a problem. You know, the problem was Dean. How do you tell why? Everybody wants to know, why did they break up? We couldn't crack that nut. Dean's daughter, of course, is an apologist for the story that they parted friends. They each went their separate ways and they were successful in their own right because they had talent. And let's just leave it at that. Well, from my perspective, and I guess since we're half an hour into it, I can start to break news like this. Jerry told us that Dean would have been content to be a crooner on the Borscht Belt or in vaudeville. He didn't have any aspirations higher than that. He just loved to sing. And you could tell he did. It's totally genuine. He loved his voice. He put feeling into his songs. And Jerry was more the mastermind, the business head, the hirer and firer. And, you know, he chose the creative direction where they would go. So in a way, unlike the clip you saw, Dean was Jerry's puppet. Remember that scene in the casting office where Jerry goes limp? He wants a ventriloquist act. That means he needs a straight man, and he goes limp. Dummy is the absent word. And then the guy walks in. I mean, the choreography, and this is what Jerry Seinfeld referred to, the comic timing was very knowing. He knew how this would affect us all. And you have to admire the craft, right? But very much Jerry was, you know, Dean was the dummy and Jerry was controlling him because Jerry was the feed bag. He brought in the money because he created the shows. Dean was a great partner. I can't sell him short. Even Billy Crystal says he was a real actor, and Dean was fine as an actor. You know, he carried his weight, but Dean was a sweetheart, a gentle man. Who here thinks Dean was a lush? Anybody?
No.
Risa's saying no. Well, Susie does. Okay, that was the persona where he slurred his words, and you know he pretended. Of course, he was drunk when they reunited on the telethon with Frank Sinatra. But the story that Jerry tells is that after a show, they go to a bar, and Dean would have a drink or two and go home to his family, and the rest of the team would stay there and drink. You know, Jerry was on the road from his family, and or was not on the road. It didn't matter. The point is that Dean was a much simpler personality, a much less inspired, talented person. He had many talents. Don't want to take that away from him. But what do you do when you're a sensitive soul and modest and could be content to just sing on vaudeville, and you come up against a dynamo, a force of nature like Risa Davids and Jerry Lewis? I had to get that in sometime, Risa. And there's a conflict there, isn't there? They're never going to, they may love each other distantly. You know, all that bullshit in front of the audience. I think of him every day and I love him and I'm here because of him. Bullshit. He's telling the audience what they need to know, want to know, what they expect to hear. And that's the entertainer's marketing side of his head talking to him. Give them what they want, just like his father did in vaudeville. You know, it's like Donald Trump giving his base the red meat they want to hate everybody else in the world except the loyalists. Excuse me if you're a supporter, but it's human nature. And I think what I know of Jerry and his treatment of our film team and the people around him, he was not a nice man. He was a very tough businessman. Cindy, go ahead. You're muted, Cindy. You're muted.
Do you know of anything in his past that caused that meanness and the way he treated people? Was he ever abused or anything?
Well, I think you saw it in the film. His dad was very hard on him. His dad's love was conditional on his performance. His dad's love was about, how good did you do, kid? Not, I love you anyway, even if you fail. You know, it's not what we give our kids. His dad was cold. His dad, you know, wanted the spotlight for himself. He was a decent looking man and a singer, and he had aspirations that he did not rise above. He got to be a talent in vaudeville and in the Borscht Belt. But I think Jerry, as Richard Belzer says, Dean was his father figure because Dean was a little older. And Dean fulfilled that, I want somebody to look up to. But of course, Jerry capitalized upon the mutual appreciation they had of each other to exploit Dean, which Dean was not capable of doing. Dean was not a manipulator. So it was the Depression, poverty, scrambling for every dollar when he was a kid. He was a street fighter, even if he didn't get into street fights. He was a scrambler and ambitious. You know, it's like all those millionaires now, or you know, billionaires who came from nothing, and they say, I was determined to succeed. And so it's the Horatio Alger story. They wanted to live out on their own terms. That's what I thought, that the edge on his shoulder was because he grew up a poor kid and wanted attention. He even said, the first time they laughed at me when I kicked the floodlight, I realized, oh my God, I did that and people laughed at it. I got them. I controlled them. And, you know, look at Mel Brooks. He's not modest. He's not egotistical either, especially now. But he knew that the audience was king. And his sole concern, whether it was writing for Sid Caesar or creating The Producers or 2000-Year-Old Man, he and Carl Reiner were just trying to be funny so people would laugh. So are you a victim of your audience? You know, or are you a manipulator? It goes both ways. I can talk about that later if you want to talk about documentary, my work with Jim Jones and the cult that he ran. But this is people long to have power over each other. Yes, Steve.
The film suggests that on some level they may have actually loved each other, and it touches or implies that there was some kind of physical or
the scene in the closet, right?
Yeah. Do you think any of that was going on?
No, I don't think so. Jerry was such a libidinous heterosexual and skirt chaser. Not a chance. And Dean was just as square in his own way, I'm sure. It's like, that's not it. But you see, that's the kind of danger this is what Belzer refers to. He says, nobody around in the 50s and 60s was that dangerous. Who would dare in black and white television to show Jerry and Dean pressed lips together in a closet and insinuate very blatantly that they were gay? And then to have them break out of the closet and say, I'm glad I'm out of that situation. You know, it was like they danced on the edge of transgression. And in a way, for the safe post-World War II 40s and 50s, it was easy to push the limit because the bar was so low. You know, people got nervous very easy, so you could go up to it. You didn't have to be that creative to go up to the discomfort level of the audience, but you could go up to it with impunity because you got them. You know, so he was a good gauge of his audience. I hope that, I'm glad you brought that up because it says a lot about his sense of what he could do with the audience. Not everybody liked him, like Ann said. If you poll people, his fans are more male than female, just like the Three Stooges are more male than female in fandom, because the Three Stooges are physically violent with themselves and other people, and women, excuse me if you're a woman who likes violence, but many do not like violence. And it's violence for violence's sake is not funny. And their relationship hinged upon physical humor that bordered on violence, you know, and control and masochism. But they played with that. They, without knowing, without giving it those names, they played with the implications of what they were doing. And the audience bought it because they didn't name it, other than this one instance of homosexuality. The audience was safe because it didn't get named. You see, they could imagine this great friendship, and without even daring to think that, gee, are they gay? Because the friendship was so dichotomous. Dean was so such a handsome man and older, and Jerry was this gawky, skinny, frenetic kid, the man boy, the boy man. It didn't get sexy. So they played with that. They played with fire. They played with sparks. Let's put it that way, not fire. This is not Martin Scorsese or any of the other, Quentin Tarantino or, any of the more modern directors, John Cassavetes. This was not them. They sort of provided that existential escape outlet to the American public that allowed them to be naughty and dangerous without consequence. Any other questions? Frank, you're coming back at me again. You're muted, Frank. That's why I muted you.
Okay. Okay, mean guy, nasty guy, sharp businessman, whatever. But it was mentioned here about how he perennially was on was it for MS, the telephones? Yeah. Was he paid for that, do you know?
No, he wasn't paid a dime.
He was not paid.
So he was charitable in that regard.
Okay, answer my question then. What did he get out of it?
Of course, more
Publicity.
publicity.
Well, I want to hear you say the word, Frank.
His ego.
He got publicity, yeah.
Adoration.
Okay.
The crowd
Adoration,
loved
okay.
him.
Worship,
And
okay.
they talked with their wallets because they gave money. He raised hundreds of millions of dollars.
Sure.
And, there are testimonials, and we actually had some of them, of the children saying how grateful they were to him. And even, he'd call them up on the the stage for the cameras to, here's my poster child. You see what I did for her and her family. It really has been a wonderful organization because, remember, he was doing this in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. MS, muscular dystrophy, rather, there wasn't a lot you could do for it because it was progressive.
Yeah, right.
And what this organization did was they provide medical attention, but each child would need escalating care, including new medical equipment, wheelchairs, breathing assistance, beds. And that organization linked them up. It served those parents, those families, it serviced the families with a muscular dystrophy victim. So it's clearly worthy. I don't know the state of it now. So you wanted me to talk? Well, Yvette, and then we'll go back to Frank's question.
Yeah, I liked Jerry Lewis previously in a lot of his things, but I did not like this movie at all. I found him disgusting. I didn't like. I'm sorry, not the movie, the character.
I see. Tell us more. Why was that?
I found it disgusting. I didn't enjoy him at all. I mean, some things were funny. I found most of the things very slapstick, and I don't know why. Like I say, maybe it's me that I'm older than when I saw him initially, because I used to really like him or like his movies.
Can you identify anything in his present persona in the movie that made you distrust him?
He seemed mean.
When did he seem mean to you?
I can't give you an answer to that because it was too many weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Weeks ago. Well, I can't document this, but I suspect that Jerry played hardball with every business negotiation he and Dean had to perform. Hardball, mean, cruel to people, fired people, demanded more attention, demanded more privileges. He was not capable of being intimate with partners. He and Dean had made peace with each other, and we form contracts and relationships,
Right.
and as we all have in our personal lives. And they had one that allowed them to coexist, but not to really share that much. They shared the work. I think it's my feeling that Dean, being the sweet, decent, simple man that he was, just got tired of Jerry's abuse of other people.
Oh, okay.
Jerry was just too mean, and Dean reached a point in his career where he had money, he had recognition, he could go off on his own. And something in himself, I don't know what, said, I don't need Jerry anymore. I don't have to tolerate this in my own name because I'm not that kind of person. So I think ultimately it was his disapproval of Jerry's persona, his real personhood, that made them split up.
Jim, it reminded me of something else then. Okay, they split up. So the motivation for surprising Jerry, and I assume it was a real surprise that Dean was, brought on stage with him in the meeting again. What's behind it? Another publicity opportunity only, or can you discuss that situation?
Sure. Well, Jerry was not expecting this at all. The television director of the telethon specials, first time I've said that word all night, telethon, set it up because Frank Sinatra called him and said, would it be okay if I brought Dean on the show when I'm hosting it or a guest? And he said, sure, but keep it a secret. So it was set up. And I think this director knew intuitively that Jerry would not say, you asshole, get off my set. He'd like play along with it, and he did the best improv he could. And so did Dean. I think if you look at what those two guys did their whole careers, again, it's the pursuit of the audience. They knew it would be a sentimental reunion. And as Jerry's son said, there was not a dry eye in the house. 700.
I was crying.
Right, because you followed the relationship, Susie, over the
I
decade. Yeah. And more perhaps they're split. So again, it's calculated to have an effect upon us, the audience. And that's why that had to have a place in the film. There is no other specific telethon footage in the whole film. And I want to get into that now because you need to know this. You saw telethon footage, Carl Musiker, the music director, they're talking about the score and the instruments and the music. They were rehearsing for various telethons. Greg shot 2 different telethons behind the scenes. And there was very good material there that supported Jerry as an actively involved producing partner and actively involved in the scheduling and the shooting and the musical performance. There's one scene where he asks a janitor to rearrange the chairs so the brass section can be in a different place and be seen. It's like we had him in action as a control freak producer producing a television show in a very, Jerry way. He wasn't sweet, but he wasn't nasty either. The scene where he sings with the young man who was going to be Jerry in the musical that never occurred, that was a rehearsal for a telethon.
Mhm.
What happened with the telethon was that there was another Jerry in the room. And the Jerry was the head of the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And at this time in 29, 10, and 11, when Greg was filming, the contributions were falling, which means the ratings were falling, which means Jerry was no longer a draw. So the other Jerry wanted to fire Jerry Lewis and dismiss him. And after the telethon in 2011, Jerry got fired. Now what you know of Jerry Lewis, how do you think he'd react to that?
Not very well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He was livid, betrayed, as you would. I mean, he spends 20, 30 years hawking for this organization.
Right.
And I even, there was a scene that I was so proud of. As Jerry went around to the various bus stops on his promotional tour for his movies, he took his cameraman with him. And he visited the heads of local television stations. This is black and white, big bulky cameras on stages with applause signs. And he asked the station managers, what are you playing Labor Day? And they said, we don't have anything. He said, how would you like to play the telethon? I bring great stars in. I said, sure. Jerry brought the telethon from like 15 stations to 215 stations in a matter of 7 years. So that's why he felt, I made this telethon what it is. And I had a scene where I created that sense of simulating him talking to the executives at the television stations, even though they weren't television executives, they were the local staffs of Paramount PR people. So they were just, institutional stooges, in white shirts and black ties. But we played them, we positioned them for our audience as though they were local executives, and he was convincing them energetically to run the telethon. And this is a fact. I'm not making this up. He added 200 stations to the broadcast and made it a national event. So, that's a real contribution. And when the organization fires you, it hurts, Susie.
I don't feel like the organization fired him because, well, there was I think personally the ratings went down because they didn't stop the telethon early enough.
It was too long.
Tired of it. I was addicted to it. I went to 3 telethons in Hollywood. I stood in line and they let 40 people in or 30 people in at a time, and the other people came out, and you were lucky if you saw Jerry because he took a lot of breaks. And yeah. You haven't mentioned his relationship, if he had one, with Ed McMahon. Ed McMahon was the gopher on the show. Do you remember that?
Yes. You're right.
He was there. But I just want to finish saying, when I went in, of the 3 times that I went, only once did I see Jerry Lewis. It was towards the beginning, and believe me, I waited in line for 3 hours with friends. And maybe it was an act, I'm not sure. He interacted with the people that were in the audience. He was adorable, he was friendly, he was, just like he is on the stage. And I think when he got fired, I was already thinking to myself, I don't want to watch these telethons anymore. They're all the same. I make my telephone call, I give the money, and it was over.
Well, it was over. And after he left, Nigel Lithgow, the dancer and creator of So You Think You Can Dance, had been a guest, and he replaced Jerry as host. And then they replaced him with the 2 women who were regulars because it became a female show. And then they stopped broadcasting it altogether. It was a relic of the 50s and maybe 60s. And it outlived its time, just like Jerry did.
And there haven't been any more telethons since then.
Gee, I wonder why. There's GoFundMe and other things online,
GoFundMe,
So
a little too early, a little too late.
Well, I want to end this part of the discussion with, you see, so he was angry at the telethon people. And rightly so. They did not do it in a courteous way. And they didn't try and ease him out slowly. And the only reckoning is that the other Jerry got fired the next year as head of the organization too. I don't know what they're doing today. But as a result, we showed Jerry some material. There was a sequence I cut where Jerry is showing the band how to play a certain piece of music. And there's another one where he's instructing a musicer how to arrange a certain piece of music. And I mentioned the janitor rearranging the chairs so the trombones could be seen. There was another sequence where there's a big board where they have all the acts. I mean, it's 24 hours and every act is scheduled for 10 or 15 minutes. So there's this huge spreadsheet It shows who's where. And Jerry is there working with his producers, talking about, well, we should move these people around in this order. You know, Jerry is being a real producer. He's doing what a real producer of a television live broadcast would do to prepare for the live broadcast. And unfortunately, even though he was tepid about these things, Jerry never saw all of these episodes, these segments in their final form. Because Greg didn't have the courage. He knows this is true, but don't tell him, please. Greg didn't have the courage to show them anyway, after we had the rights to all the footage, because it would have humanized Jerry and given more credence to his subsequent career as a producer of the telethon. But Jerry was so egocentric and hurt and egotistical about the damage, the wrongfulness, the vengefulness. He wouldn't even show himself in a good light regarding the telethon. So all of it is gone that is recognizable as telethon material. We had great sequences where he calls out a little girl in braces, you know, and she talks about how much she loves him and what he did for her family. And we had plenty of schmaltz in there. You know, as much schmaltz as Jerry could deliver, you know, without tearing or sweating up. You can remember him with the towel around his neck and perspiring so much.
But he
in the middle of the night.
was. It,
But it was that kind of self-crucifixion that was for, this is all I have left. Don't you see? That was part of his desperation to salvage a career that had already been lost. This was a man going down. And after he went down with the telethon, he even dug himself a deeper hole in iniquity, I should say iniquity, a deeper hole of forgetfulness by not allowing this material to be included in the documentary. So never let somebody write their own autobiography, because they will totally misunderstand their own interests. That's the lesson I take away from this. Now, when you're doing celebrity biographies, it's very hard to navigate those waters. Some are more candid than others. Some producers are more courageous than others. Greg was forever a victim of his being a fan instead of being a filmmaker. Phyllis Diller was easy for Greg to make a very good film about, because he loved her, she loved him, she was transparent, he could do anything with her. And he got wonderful material about this geriatric woman who is just as vibrant as, you know, from the days we first were introduced to her. It's a great celebrity profile. Do we want to talk more about the telethon? We can go on about other things.
You know,
It's a shame because, you know, Jerry brought all he knew as a producer and a director and a promoter and a marketer, you know, to the telethon. We even had an image where he's kissing his chihuahua. He was very close to his dogs. And it's like the portrait was complete, you know, and you could draw what you wanted from it, but at least it showed that he wasn't a fake in terms of his skill as a producer of shtick or schmaltz. You know, I'm not saying this was high intellectualism. You know, this was post-World War II popular culture. The GIs coming back from World War II learned more from being in France and screwing German women or Italian women than they ever did in Iowa. You know, and we were so naive then that this stuff passed as being daring and dangerous, but it was. I mean, you have to see the point of cultural criticism is you have to view the art as relative to its times and the audience it was intended for. Just ask Arthur and Arlene, because they're silent as can be and have no insights into this era or this topic at all.
Can I speak?
Please do. I've been waiting all night.
I am a child of the Catskills.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And I loved Jerry Lewis. And yes, I believe you do separate who he is as a man from the wonderful entertainment that he provided. We sat here and watched this film, which the three of us loved. And it brought us back to being children again and laughing at his shtick. It was refreshing, a wonderful change from those people who call themselves comedians. As I said, I grew up with the best of them and had a great education in how to entertain. And Arthur and our friend Susan all came from that period, and we loved him.
Did you see him in the Catskills ever, or his father?
Yes, I did. And then we saw him in a show.
Later in life.
Yeah, when we
Yeah,
were
yeah.
married already.
Yeah.
And he was great. And I don't care that he was not a nice guy unless he wasn't for certain reasons. We don't know those reasons. But the ability to entertain the way he did, there are very few people who can do that now. And I regret that.
Okay, why do you think that's so, Arlene? Why is it so much harder to do that to people than it was for Lewis to do it in the 50s and 60s? I have an idea, but I want you to tell me.
Well, I think that people are very self-conscious, not confident of themselves, or the humor is pretty black and they're angry.
Okay. Could it be that they're so much more sophisticated than his humor, which was aimed at a largely uneducated culture that didn't know fine drama or fine comedy, but the common man? I say that out of respect. People who couldn't have known otherwise. Was it easier for him to be successful then than it is for even smarter comics to be successful today, because the audience is so much more sophisticated?
I don't know that. I don't know that the audience is more sophisticated. I don't believe that the younger people are. I mean, we watch TV, we see what's happening, we bemoan the lack of culture and a culture as we knew it.
Okay. I know you know this performer, and I'll bring him up. Lenny Bruce.
May in part be a resistance today to being seen as unsophisticated and to allow yourself to be more of a child. This is just very genuine, childish stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people resist that today.
They do. But I want to talk about Lenny Bruce, because working in the same era, late 50s and early 60s, Lenny Bruce did not become as popular as Jerry Lewis. And I think that was so because he was transgressive. He intentionally crossed the line. He intentionally got under people's skin. There's a funny bit where he's Kiki, the gay male nurse in a prison, and it's like so ahead of his time to expect the average audience to accept that as political or social commentary back in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. It's like Lewis and Martin were not that. They were on the other side of that transgressive line, and they could reach millions of more people than Lenny Bruce ever did. Lenny Bruce now is more a cultural icon for, those of us who are called elitists and educated and have a taste for 50s and 60s hipsterism and hippiedom and rebellion. I feel that the 60s were necessary because our culture was trapped, and we young people had to like wake everybody else up to say it's no longer the same world anymore. And Lenny Bruce was at the leading edge of that. There were others. Mort Saul was political in his early day.
Right.
There was Godfrey Cambridge. There was the Black Comic, Richard Pryor and Carlin. Of course, these people advanced comedy to politics, and it was funnier for it. They never got political. So it's like he couldn't grow up. He didn't grow with his audience, you see, and that's why he got left behind. And I think in his final years, that's why he was so nasty and mean, because he jokes about how my picture has to be bigger than Brad Pitt's on the hotel in Cannes. But it's like he never forgave the public or anybody else for not continuing his stardom. And this is what made him so bitter about, one, it's why the telethon meant so much to him, because it was his last gasp at stardom and he lost it. And it's why Greg didn't have the courage to say, this is your legacy, you have to show it. He didn't have the guts to do that. So this is how an egotist shows that they're not so brave. I could go on and on, but let's have Susie something to say.
I think I'm taking a little bit of issue with what you're saying, because when I watched this, even though there's so much about him that was slapstick, I sat in this chair and I was laughing out loud.
It's still funny.
Scene,
yeah.
That scene when he's in the airplane and he's going back and back and back and back, and the next thing you know, he's out of the airplane. I was hysterical. I was just laughing so hard, and I'm a sophisticated adult. I don't want to hear political jokes, and I don't want to hear things that are borderline on nasty. I like that wholesome humor.
Well, and he knew it. He got you. He knew
He didn't
you.
get me, but he could come back and I would still laugh at all that stuff that he does. I don't think it's insulting. It's pure humor. That chair thing, oh my God, you could watch that for 10 minutes. And
Jerry Seinfeld is like that. He takes
yes,
on nothing
I love Jerry
controversial.
Seinfeld, right.
He takes on the minuscule aspects of life and blows them up into humor. It's a great service. I cannot dismiss his insightfulness. I didn't do anything for me. It's like polite doesn't work.
Didn't he work almost until he passed away? I remember seeing him
Jerry?
very heavy set from his medication and a red shirt, and he did something. I don't know whether it was.
I don't know what he did. This film that you saw us the promotional tour to Cannes with. So that was before 2011. It's probably 2010. He like Jerry went with people who flattered him, not people who would make him tell the truth. And because he couldn't face the truth about himself. It's like the Jack Nicholson line, you can't face the truth. It's like not part of his DNA. It had to fit in with his conception of himself. I'll tell you a nasty story to support my arguments. When we finished this film, Starz was very keen on it. The Starz audience was skewed a little older. Jerry Lewis's fans skewed a little older. And every year there's a convention of the Television Critics Association in Los Angeles. And they trot out all the stars in the series and shows that they're going to be broadcasting in the coming season, starting in September. And Starz wanted Jerry to come and speak at this event. There were like 400 or 500 television critics, such as they are. So they said, what can we do to get you here? Do you want us to send a limo for you? Do you want to take the train? Do you want to fly? We'll give you first class tickets. He said, no, I want you to charter me a plane. From San Diego. You're in the air before you have to descend. Okay, well, we'll charter you a plane. So they got him a small Gulfstream. Was he coming with an entourage? No, he was coming with his assistant. He was going to fly into Santa Monica Airport, be transported to the Beverly Hilton, and then limousine back to the Santa Monica Airport to return to his boat in San Diego the same afternoon. And they said, we've got a Gulfstream 4 for you. And he said, no, 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 I want a Gulfstream 24.
What? We didn't.
A larger plane.
Just for the two of them, you mean?
That's right. Just for the two of them. Why did he? And he got it. He got it because he wanted to demonstrate his control over the network stars, that he could still command this extravagance that was no longer practical or necessary. It was totally egotistical.
Got it.
So it was worth another $25,000 for the charter, to get him there. And he was received with great applause. I mean, I was there. They loved it. So you can see these executives at a billion-dollar company like Starz saying, well, I suppose it was worth it. But they were blackmailed by him. He wanted to see his continued dominance and control over an organization. He didn't care about the plane. It would have been just as fine, with a private jet, or a private limo. Not as pleasant, perhaps.
Yeah.
And to me, that says what the man was all about in his later years. Not commendable.
No.
He wasn't thinking about climate change, either was I. I was thinking egotism. It's like he couldn't believe that the world had left him behind. He still needed to cling to his own notion of fame and importance. Now, all of us do that as we age. You want your kids to love you, but when they get their own kids, they still love you, but they're divided a little bit. It's
I don't think the world left him behind.
Oh yeah, ask him. Well, you can't ask him anymore. What do you mean by that, Susie?
I don't think that he could get roles in movies as a leading man in love scenes, but I don't think that the world left him behind. I think he didn't accept the fact that it was his time. It was over. Let him enjoy retirement.
But if you span 60 years of entertaining and suddenly nobody's booking your tour anymore, even to two-bit casinos in Missouri, you begin to think nobody loves me anymore. Instead, well, they still love you for who you were, and those people love you, but people love others now. It's like he couldn't get off his addiction to being loved by other people. It belies a deep insecurity.
Definitely.
Doris, did you say something? I saw your window light up.
No, I'm just kind of listening, and I was wondering, a thought just crossed my mind. Do you think part of Jerry's going for success had anything to do with the showing up his father somehow, that he was much better than his father and more talented?
Oh, I think that was he accomplished that quite early.
He did feel that
when he and Jerry got out of when he and Dean got out of vaudeville and made it to the stage, that all of the crowds cheering for them in New York at Madison Square Garden. I mean, he'd made it. His dad never achieved those heights.
I know. That's what I meant. I meant that he was that part of his goal to be better than, I'm going to be better than my father.
Absolutely. He wanted to be better people than his father.
Everybody.
Right. There you go, Doris. You're right. He wanted to be the center of the entertainment universe. And he was from 56 to 66.
I used to watch him and Dean when I was a girl, a few years ago, babysitting on Saturday night when he would come on that show for an hour. And I tell you, it was just, I looked forward to that every single solitary week. They were so great.
They were the first rock stars.
It was so good. Yeah. And now I don't watch any late night shows. They're all political. There's no enjoyment. There's no fun. There's no humor. I mean,
there's a lot of cynicism.
These guys were funny and they entertained, but now there's no fun. There's no entertainment. It's just nastiness, So they've lost me. I like Jerry better.
I totally get it. totally understand. And, you're right to feel that way. You're not wrong. It's like, of course, I understand and we all understand why you feel that way.
Jim,
It was fun.
Jim, didn't he do some instructing at USC?
Oh, that was a joke.
Why was that a joke?
Well, he did it, he recorded, and then he made this book about the total filmmaker. And I actually know some people who were in one of his last classes. I didn't talk to them about it. I should, I suppose. But again, he did know quite a bit. And believe me, when you talk to film students, as I do now at the same institution, they're a sponge. And whenever a celebrity shows up, they can't wait to ask all their questions. And they're so amazed that, but that was the 70s when he did that. I arrived at SC in 1970, and his last year teaching was probably 69. So I missed him. But he had something to give. He was an inspiring figure in 1969. But his star was fading.
Jim,
Yeah.
that's Joel.
Yeah.
Here, as you know, here on the East Coast, the word has always been that the guy who owned the 500 Club in Atlantic City, Skinny D'Amato, is the one that put them together because he recognized that they had a chemistry together. Was there any mention of that when you were looking at documents?
No, I don't know that. It's news to me about how they met. Greg should have asked that question, but he didn't.
Did he throw all of you a big party at the end?
No.
Did you all
When we had the
volunteer?
premiere, Jerry walked by me and he said, Jerry. And he said, yeah. And he walked past me, waved me off. We had talked on the phone.
Oh,
It's like, okay, but you know what? That was Jerry. I wasn't, it stung at first, but we'd never met in person. And to show you what a glad-hander he was, when Greg showed him the first clips we had made, Jerry raved about Greg's editor, and I even talked to him on the phone. And I want to tell you guys this story. And I told Jerry this story, and he didn't like it. So when I was a kid, I was the one who was blurred in the kindergarten picture because I was what we would call today hyperkinetic. Mostly I was just bored with everything else because it wasn't keeping up with me. And my wife will tell you the same thing now. But the psychologist at UCLA said, you're just super executive ability, and no, you're not ADD, but that's another argument. But I grew up acting like Jerry Lewis without knowing it. I was filled with antics and mockery and performance. And I even played a chimpanzee in a youth theater once. And Jerry reminds us all of a chimpanzee. Notice the ape progression in the movie. So years go by, this was 1987 or so. My father had just had his second bypass surgery. And when he was in the surgical recovery unit, his sutures burst. And he went into cardiac arrest, and his brain was deprived of oxygen for 3 minutes plus. So you all know that means something to a senior person. And my brother, who lived in Cleveland with my father, not with him, but in the same city, had been his caregiver and was with him during the surgery and after, but was called to Columbus for a trial that he had to run. And he called me and he said, could you come in for the week and spend it with Dad while he recovers from the surgery? And I said, sure. So I flew in and I went straight from the airport to the hospital. I walk in with my suitcase, and my brother pulls me over to the bed, and we're both standing over my dad. And he said, Dad, do you know who this is? My dad opens his eyes and he looks at me and he says, Jerry Lewis.
oh my God.
So my dad, Doris, laughed at Jerry Lewis as well, but couldn't understand me. And I'll never forget that. And
That's
I told, it's so I don't have to go into my personal history, but obviously there's a connection there. So when Greg called me, I was introduced to Greg through a group of people who shared job leads. And I went over to Greg's house where he had done his initial editing. And he showed me 10 minutes of material that he had put together. And it wasn't really that professional, but the clips were fun. And I looked at it and I said to myself, I have to do this because I vibed so much with Jerry Lewis. I got it. I got his humor. Doris, I get what you said. Arlene, I get what you said about his charm, his magnetism, his insanity. It was fun. It was safe. That's not how I feel about humor today. But I get it. I got it then when I was a kid, and I got it in 2010 when I met Greg. And when I saw Greg's documentary about Phyllis Diller, I said, I could work with Greg and I must do this. Actually, I said it there. I said, I must do this with Greg and his brother, who was an executive at Starz. I mean, it's all about who you know. So Greg's brother, who was a lawyer at Starz, brought Greg to the production executives at Starz and said, Greg did this film on Phyllis Diller. He's got a contact with Jerry Lewis. He shot some footage. Take a look at this 10 minutes, meet Greg. They gave him a budget. He exceeded it, of course. But so that's how I was drawn into it. I just felt this was pulling my soul into the project. I was a sucker for it. And, I was a different person at that time in my life than when I admired Jerry Lewis and Nutty Professor or any of the other films. And that's how I committed to it. And it was very funny. I was a little ambivalent. I didn't know where we were going with it. And Greg certainly gave me no direction. And then I just said, okay, let's break out what are the important moments in his life that we know we must cover. This is a typical documentary technique where you say, what are the points we need to tell the story that our story cannot exist without? So we said his upbringing in vaudeville, his career with Dean, his separation from Dean, his trials as a first-time director, meaning the bellboy, and his successes as a film director, and the telethon. And we checked all those boxes and built scenes around those as modules, and then we began to move them around without making transitions between them. And some of the most fun parts of the film are the segues, the transition between the segments, and to the point where they blur because they're connected. And I didn't know it was going to fall that way, but that was my procedural solution to having all these disconnected parts and saying, how do we fit them all together? And again, Susie, it's like, where does the idea come from? You feel it, and I know that's not scientific and filmmaking is not scientific, but that's the start of it. Even though it may be impulsive or emotional or inexplicable when it comes to you, you still have to do the work to make it play. So it's not like it all just came out of my mind that way. It's, you begin to play around with it and the material tells you what it can do. And then you're the controller of it. So I wanted you to hear that, because I think it's an important part of how I get to claim that as a badge of honor that I too fell victim to the Jerry spell, but wanted to take a higher order of objectivity over it than my
Jim,
yeah.
Jim, do you feel like this is one of your best pieces of work that you've done?
Absolutely, no question.
I-
Even though we didn't get to show any of the telethon as a telethon, even though we didn't show any of the family or the strife in his life or the meanness, it still stands. And I use this as a, not that I get work from it anymore, but I use this as a resume piece to show I created a language between all the different parts, the different genres of material, the stock footage, the still photos, the old films, the new film, the interviews, to create a new language where they're talking back and forth to each other. And, have I profited from that? No, but that's how I feel about it. And it's, that's the fiction I tell myself, that's what I did. So,
Jim, are there ways to make a film like this now different from when you made this film, in the sense of, you said that you watched 13 films, kept it all in your brain, maybe took notes, and then went back and looked at the cuts to put in there. Is there today a different way to do that rather than the long way?
every person's creative instincts are different. You know that in your work, Steve.
Mhm.
Not that you create novels or films, but there's a creative way of thinking about situations that everybody brings to a challenge, more or less. We all have that. We all face that. My brother, who was a big utilities attorney, said he felt he was creative with every contract he wrote. And okay, I accept that. I get it, because he thought deeply about the content and the interaction of the points he was making, and structuring an argument when you're preparing a case, if you're a prosecutor or a litigator. This is how the mind works to structure what it wants to tell. I think all those, the ability to do that today exists. It's a matter of, do you have the legal right to do it? Do you have a willing subject who's willing to submit to that kind of introspection? If you guys ever want to see the People's Temple documentary I did on Jim Jones, he doesn't share a whit about who he is, but you know who he is because you see how different he was from the people who claimed he loved them. They were totally taken in. So it's a crazy thing. It's like, this is how filmmaking works. You dive in, you try and be true to yourself and true to the material, and then clever and creative and maybe not so honest, but you play, and it's what comes out of that mix. Reese's smiling. Yeah, she does that every day. That's how she keeps Stan in line. It's what makes filmmaking fun and challenging and so curious and so rare. It's a privilege, I feel privileged to have been allowed to do this, and that Greg gave me so much freedom to structure it this way. And even though I felt terribly restrained and disappointed in him because he didn't have the courage to stand up to Jerry, I still feel like we accomplished something. And if only it's to elaborate the successes of his career and his skill. Every film has a point of view. You remember we saw The Lemon Tree once, about a Palestinian woman who lived next door to the defense minister of Israel. And I was in with Stephen Farber, I was a panelist, and some member of the audience said, well, why didn't this film acknowledge that the Palestinians are sending rockets across the border? And I said, because that was not the film. Every film has a point of view, and you have to accept it for what it's trying to do on its own terms. You can criticize it, but you have to acknowledge what it's trying to do. And that film, The Lemon Tree, was all about the betrayal of this innocent woman who'd done nothing. And she was the victim of the Israeli defense minister's wife, who wanted the lemon orchard cut down. And she was also a victim of the Palestinian lawyer who seduced her and then ignored her and went off and married somebody else. So it's like, that's what that film was about. It wasn't about who's right or wrong about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's about what's the humane thing to do. What we're looking at human decisions and human behavior. That's what cinema film does, to those of us who really like it. It just holds a mirror up to us of ourselves and in the behavior of other people. So granted, it may be a stretch for me to say this holds a mirror up to Jerry Lewis, but when I fill in the blanks of what's not spoken,
Not there.
what's not there, it's that's why I wanted to share it with you. And I'm glad you're so willing to indulge me in my experiences of making it. But this is real gut-wrenching documentary material, as was my Jim Jones material, which we can talk about that at some other date. It's not particularly ethical behavior time. It's very unethical behavior, but it's all about, you have to expose yourself as a filmmaker when you're making a documentary and be vulnerable and be a human being to the people you're filming, because otherwise you don't get they'll hide from you. So to the extent that you're willing to be vulnerable, they're willing to be vulnerable, except for Jerry, who was a rock, never gave an inch. But so be it. It's just one of those things. But it is one of the best. Thank you for asking. It is one of the best things I ever did. I've done lots of crap. We did see something else I did that I think you like. You call After the Rain. We can show it again if you want. We showed it, I think, live at university. It's about South Africa, a white soldier, white girlfriend, a black man becomes a hostage drama in her apartment. You remember that?
Yes, yeah, we do.
Yes.
All right, so that was the other thing that I'm really proud of, because that was an honest to goodness, gut-wrenching, humanistic examination of even dislikable people and hateful people when they acknowledge the harm they've done themselves, as in the white soldier who realizes he's hurt himself as much as he hurt anybody else. So those are the kinds of films. What?
One simple question, because I'm very naive about filmmaking. Doesn't the editor actually hold the film together, editing it? Isn't it kind of like, the egg and the flour, and it holds it together? I mean, if you do a poor job.
You could say that. You could say that. But I teach my students that the editor's job is to keep the director honest and to tell them how their material is really playing to the audience. The editor stands between the intention of the creative impulse and the reception, the perceived impression that the audience has. And in commercial filmmaking, we don't do these for ourselves. It's not fine art that you put on a canvas and put on the wall of a museum and say, like it or not, there it is. No, we make films so that other people can see it and be moved by it. So my role, I never saw myself as just an editor, and maybe that's my problem. But I saw myself as a filmmaker, and I tried to tell the truth to directors about what they were doing. And some listened and some didn't. And some listened and couldn't do anything about it. It's like, it's such a political environment. Personally political and financially political, in where the film is with the producers. It's the game I played with myself and everything I've done is, if I were the sole creator on this, what would I do? And I went with it. And people changed, some of what I did, and sometimes they embraced it. Sometimes they embraced it without knowing it. They said, "Oh yeah, okay." They didn't realize how good it was or bad it was. It's like, it's a lonely profession, in that it's said that editing is the invisible art because nobody sees what it's really doing. It's as much the art of omission as it is commission. It's what you don't show, what you choose to leave out is really where the art is. And what remains and how you put it together is also the art. But
well, you definitely left out his bar mitzvah.
yeah, I don't think he had one. Yes,
He did have
I'm
one.
sure he did.
Yeah. Oh,
Jim,
maybe.
I just wanted to say, because I started out by questioning the meaning of this and why you brought it to us, and I'm so glad you did,
Yeah.
because it's a rare, very rare opportunity. I did not realize your role in the film at all. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. And I learned a great deal, and I appreciate your sharing it with us. I had one additional observation. It was said that you got to play to the audience at their time, at the time, right, historically where we are as a culture. And I think that's must be true of filmmakers. You can maybe portray previous in historical kinds of things, but it has to be done in a way that's acceptable to the audience of the day. And I think the individual performers, speaking here of comedians, I was thinking of others of the same period. Do you think that Jack Benny, Eddie Cantor, the other vaudeville comedians who went on to radio and then early television, would they be accepted, be popular in today's audience?
No, I don't think their humor would play as much. because they were even safer. Jack Benny made jokes about himself all the time about how cheap he was, or a violin player, and Rochester just begged the question. George Burns was just a cranky old man in his older days, and he had Gracie to play off of. Milton Berle was kind of just a vaudevillian. I don't think he was profound. I think the embarrassment of Alan King is that he was stuck in the past and just was not relevant. It's they dared to be outrageous. They pushed the envelope, Jerry and Dean, but Jerry, in ways others did not. And that's the reason for their success. It's not that the others weren't successful, or didn't please the audience. I watched Jack Benny as a kid in black and white, with my eyes in front of the TV set. Jell-O again. It was, I didn't get half the jokes, but it's these guys exceeded their time. And then the times exceeded Jerry. It's just, that's the way of the world. We don't, none of us expect to replace Dianne Feinstein. I would love to, but it's like not going to happen for us. And Jerry, could never admit to himself it's not going to happen for him. He should have said, he couldn't acknowledge that, because he kept saying it should happen for me. I'm still great. And that's the tragedy. And I was thinking the other day, I also think Michael Jackson is a worse American tragedy, because Jerry is just about hubris. Michael Jackson had talent, mega talent beyond that.
But Jim, that happens in all fields. How about sports athletes who
Absolutely.
retire who
Right.
should have retired long before they did?
Seinfeld says that in his film. He said, I wanted to stop before I hit that breaking point.
Right.
I think it's true of every profession. I
Yes,
really
it
do.
is. Absolutely.
Doesn't matter. The doctor who operates once too late, once
Yeah.
he should have given up. The rabbi who doesn't know to step down, or how to
Oh, there are a
leave
few
the
of those.
pulpit. There are a few of those. That's right.
I have to say Stan is the exception, because he continues to excel and inspire. And so many of the others do not.
But
They're still in a pulpit.
he's retired. He walked out at age 65. He's
doing
doing
it.
only what he wants to do now.
But he's still doing it.
He's
great
still
at it.
doing
He's
it.
terrific
That's
at
what
it.
my
Okay,
Zoom-
but he's not standing in the pulpit preaching every week, and that's
He doesn't
what
have
they
to.
they
He
don't.
doesn't have
That's
all he needs is 24 receptive ears, and he knows he's connecting.
that's correct. He's connected, but he knew to leave the pulpit when he did, and that's
He couldn't stand the fundraising. I get it. Not to get too personal.
no.
I don't know.
We needed that time in Israel. It was wonderful.
Oh,
was wonderful.
but
But seriously, it's true of a lot that you're saying is true. A lot that you're saying is true about a lot. A lot of us edit all through our lives.
yes,
We
yes.
choose and walk away from and forget and concentrate on different things as we get going through the ages. And
Yeah. But you
we're
see,
all editors.
we all edit our own lives.
Yes, we do.
And Jerry Lewis told to go, let himself go out there.
That's right.
But I want to say this much about your sojourn in Israel for 12 years. It's a credential just like any other that you guys have, because it gives so much validity to those of us who maybe have visited, but not lived there and grown to understand that culture in all its multiplicity, and unfathomableness to us. He continues, as do you, but in Torah study, continues to teach from that experience. That is not just something you did it for yourselves, but as it changed yourselves, you became different, of a different agency to us. Does that make sense?
It's transformative.
Yeah.
Totally
So-
transformative.
So those of us, who may not be practicing law anymore, or
Right.
hospital administration, or kindergarten management, or
Teaching.
financial management, but let me finish. It doesn't mean that our lives or our mental careers are over. We still
right.
know how to do what we do. we just carry it forward in different ways.
Different ways.
You know,
That's
if you have the
exactly right.
appetite, you seek out ways to do that. Yes, Susie.
No, it's the same with teaching.
Same
Yes,
teaching.
absolutely.
As much as I love teaching and I hated to retire, I retired for 2 years and then I went back to teach and I knew that this was going to be my last year when I finally did
Gross.
retire. And I'm so glad that I did because everything has changed. It's so different.
Sure, much
Wouldn't
different
even happy
environment.
teaching now. But I keep my skills and can still do it.
You're still the person you were, you see.
Absolutely.
And in a way, this is Jerry Lewis's hubris. He says, I'm still the person I was. And I look at him and I say, no, you're just an angry old man. You can't connect with people today. You know, that's, you've not grown with your audience. And, but teaching's tough because the audience is always changing, you know, and I'm learning that as I teach 20-year-olds,
Yeah, sure.
24-year-olds.
Well, Jim, I have to go, but I wanted to thank you very, very much.
This was very special.
Well, it was for me too. Thank you for allowing me to share
Thank you,
a
Jim.
big part of my life with you and why and what it's like. So you are my trusted friends and I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
And we appreciate you and thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
You all.
Good night, everybody.
Let us know what's next.
Okay, I think I know what it's going to be.
Okay.
Remember Tick Tock Boom? Tick Tick Boom?
Tick, tick, boom, yeah.
Andrew Garfield?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
His first film.
his first film.
It was called 99 Homes, and it was made by a Middle Eastern guy about foreclosure in America in 2008.
Oh, wow.
And it's all about the ethics of evicting people. So swimmers, this is for you. You
Did
know,
you say 99 foes, F-O-E-S?
homes,
Homes.
H-O-M-E-S.
99
It's
homes.
about a guy who gets evicted from his own home and then winds up working as a honcho crew boss for the guy who evicted him from his own home, and how he gets seduced into becoming them. And the ethical decision he has to make at the end of the film. Whose side am I on? There are other films like this. There's a great film I've hesitated to show called Mephisto, right? Mephistopheles, about the guy who sold his soul to the devil, not just Daniel Webster, but who didn't. But it's about a theater director who was this iconoclastic progressive guy in the 1930s who gets seduced by the Nazis because they give him his own theater to run. And ultimately, he becomes a pawn in the Nazi and they turn against him. So this seduction of save us from where we were, but watch out because it's a bargain you may make with the devil.
Yeah.
Those are two really interesting films. Maybe we'll do both. Mephisto is a really great film. 99 Homes is a small, modest film, but this guy is, Andrew Garfield's really terrific, and the plotting is, and the antagonist to him, the eviction boss, they're great. So I think we're going to do that. And 99 Homes, it's on Amazon Prime, and that'll be 2 weeks from tonight.
Did you edit it?
No, it's the kind of film I would have loved to have edited.
I
because
have
it's
a
about
favor.
something.
I have a favor to ask. In future films, since you've taught us so much about editing tonight, if we might mention how it was edited, the future films, and you give comments on it.
Well, I know
He
how
does.
it's made because I made it, but the films that I programmed for you, other than After the Rain, I don't know how they were edited. I can comment on the editorial.
Comment on them,
process.
right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
but
From your expertise.
okay, here's the thing. Editing is not editing. Editing is filmmaking. It's writing, directing, photography, sound work, music. It's everything because it all ends there where it gets combined. It's like conducting all the instruments in the orchestra to harmonize with each other. And it comes down to the director-editor relationship into who does what and how they influence each other. As it was in After the Rain, the South African film I did, it was a great collaboration between two like minds who just worked very hard to make it the best it could be. And if you look at the Scorsese movies, he has worked with only one editor for 30 years. Woody Allen worked with Carol Littleton for 20 years. And Ron Howard worked for his two editors for 20 years. You know, as you develop a common experience, a common language, a sensibility, a sensitivity. Hopefully it's not button pressing, but you're speaking truth to power when you're an editor. I always, you know, perhaps with too much arrogance, thought I was as smart as anybody I worked with. So I demanded that pulpit with them, and I got it with Greg and with the director of After the Rain. When I don't get that, I don't perform as well. So it's just a facet of filmmaking, you know. But yeah, I'll comment as much as I can tell.
Lovely, thank you.
All right. Well, this was a great discussion.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good night. I had a great time. Thank you for indulging, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.